Outlaw Lawyer.
Welcome back to the Outlaw Lawyers. We have Josh Whitaker and Joe Hamer, managing partners at Whitaker and Hamer Law Firm. Our special guest today is Cassandra Nicholas, also an attorney with Whitaker and Hamer. I'm Morgan Patrick, consumer advocate, and we have a full ledger today on the program, so let's get moving.
So, Morgan, the first thing I wanted to tackle today was I do a lot of air quotes now that we're on YouTube. I know those don't translate very well to the radio, but I do it a lot.
Talk with your hands, that's cool.
So the Don't Say Gay bill. Florida legislation, I guess just from reading, this is kind of in response to the ongoing battle of how gender issues are taught or not taught in public schools. And Florida, at least politically, being a little more conservative than maybe the average state in the union, this is kind of a response to that. And again, I think this is a good time. This is kind of a sensitive topic, and this is a good time to remind everybody who may be listening or watching. Here, what I personally believe about this bill doesn't matter on this show. Political, affiliations we try to throw out the window. And on the Outlaw Lawyer, one of the things we try to do is we try to just look at the statute, we try to look at the underlying law, and kind of objectively just say, hey, this is what it is, this is what it isn't. And this is a good example of that, because this statute, depending on what side you fall on, is being portrayed as, I think, crazy. It's just, what it's being portrayed as really outweighs what it actually is on paper. Cassandra, I know you've had a chance to look at this, and what's your initial take? Just again, no personal belief, just based on what the bill's actually trying to do.
So I do want to just give the full title is Parental Rights and Education Bill, and that's House Bill 1557 in Florida. So my understanding is that it did pass the House, went to the Senate and was edited, revised, and then did pass the Senate. So it does need to go back to the House, and we'll see whether or not they actually revise it further or pass it in the form that it's been passed as in the Senate. And then I believe Ron DeSantis has already indicated that he plans on signing it if it does get to him.
I heard that too, yeah.
It's interesting how it's being framed in the media, in that the word gay isn't even present in the bill to start with, but it does discuss how my first take is that it's just not very clearly written.
I got the same impression. Very broad.
Very,
too broad, overly
for
broad.
Sure.
Even if you agree, and we'll continue to talk about it, but even if you agree with the aims of the bill and what the bill maybe was intended to do, it didn't translate to paper very well.
It's unclear whether they're referring to just classrooms kindergarten through third grade, or which provisions of it actually apply to all public school education in Florida. So even if it was passed, how it would be implemented is really unclear.
And you never want that from a statute. That a statute like this is just going to immediately be litigated, right? If you're, and again, this is just, I think some people even get confused the way it gets reported on. I don't know that some people understand that this is just a state bill in Florida. It's being reported on across the nation. So I think some people hear about it and think it's some kind of national issue, and it is talking about a national issue, but this is just talking about the state of Florida, and it's just in the Florida state legislature. And I was really confused too. I had heard that, so I read a lot of reports on it, and I had read that it only affected kindergarten to third grade, and parts of it specifically do mention kindergarten to third grade. Some of it seems like it applies to every grade. But yeah, just you can see, and that's the problem I think with the news a lot of time. You can see this PR battle kind of taking place on the way it's reported. And of course, if you get your news from CNN, New York Times, you're kind of getting this one version. If you get your news from Fox News, Wall Street Journal, or Drudge, or wherever you get it, you're kind of getting another version. And so that's why I think it's really important to just read the bill, and it's not very long.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Just a brief 7 pages.
Well, a brief 7 pages, and the intro takes up a page or two. So when you actually get in there, but it does. I've got it here in front of me. That's what I'm looking at right now, the statute.
I see the book.
I think it's just overly broad, man. It's vague, really. It strikes me as vague, overly broad. It lacks specificity. And that leads to the problems, like,
Yeah.
a lot of problems. And you made a good point as far as how it's being reported in the media. And, you get the nickname, the Don't Say Gay nickname, that sticks. It's being reported nationally, and that kind of frames the perspective of anyone who's not going to dig deeper into it. And they're going to see that negative connotation. And like you said, I think a lot of people see this as a national issue without really realizing that it's kind of confined to the state of Florida. But a lot of the issues that people have with this bill, I think, are a direct result of how it is kind of vague and broad. And when you're able to apply your own interpretation to these things that aren't defined with enough specificity, your political leanings are going to come into play. And so you're going to have people looking at it, and they're going to interpret it the way that they want to, and that, I think that leads to a lot of the issues that you see with it, and a lot of the controversy.
Yeah, if this were to pass the way that the version that we're seeing, the governor would sign it, and then this goes to part of the bureaucracy to enforce, right? So this goes, I don't know, in Florida, I don't know if I guess a Department of Education or something like that. It gets handed off, and then, I don't mean this mean, but like a bureaucrat, picks this up and says, okay, what does this mean? And how do I enforce it? And there's a lot of stuff in here. There's some opt-out provisions for parents when it comes to counseling. If I think it's kind of designed where basically if a student were to report or a mental health issue, or I think the way it's being reported is like come out of the closet to like a counselor or a school official, like that information needs to go to the parents.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they're trying to do here, and give the parents some kind of control over the education. We are talking about people under the age of 18. So I can see what the concerns are, and again, my personal preference here doesn't matter, but legislation this broad and this, it's a lightning rod for, there's going to be 18 cases filed the day DeSantis signs this thing.
And that's part of it, is that it won't just be bureaucrats enforcing it. This also has a provision in empowering parents to attempt to enforce it by directly suing schools. All state legislatures should be wary of any bill that hits their desk that is going to be taking tremendous financial resources from the schools for litigation rather than education.
Yeah, it's encouraging litigation in a lot of ways. And so I think if you look at it, and if you look at it at its barest sense, and you take what appears to be the motivation, if you look at that in a positive light and you say people want to give, parents a say in their kids' education, their development, they want them to retain some element of control, that way doesn't sound like a terrible end. The actual application, there's just so many subjective things that, there's terms that have a very subjective meaning. For instance, it refers to discussing things in ways that are age appropriate or developmentally appropriate. It's a subjective thing, man.
Right.
Like and you could look at it and say, well, we're going to use like common sense, and you're going to use like a reasonableness standard to determine those things, but that doesn't really exist. You've got such a wide swath of the population now. It's very difficult because you have such varying opinions among people. So how is that going to be? How do you define it?
No, I think you're right. I think you can see kind of both sides. Like this, this is going to make a lot of people angry if you're against it. And a lot of people who are even for it. It's not. I don't think it's going to get you where you're trying to go. From an attorney's perspective, when we read a statute, we want the statute to be as simple and as clear as possible. So like, this is wrong. If you do it, this is the punishment. Or if you need a process for something, this is going to address this, and here's the process, and here's the form you file, and you just want it clear as a bell, so there's no room for misinterpretation. Something like this is just not going to survive any kind of court scrutiny, because that's what happens, right? It gets legislated, but the court gets to interpret what this means when it's cloudy.
It'll definitely be interesting. There are even provisions regarding classroom discussions and what topics would be off limits under this bill. But a lot of the reporting's discussing arguments about what classroom discussion could include. Do they need to actually remove books from shelves? It seems like there would be an immediate elimination of topics and materials in classrooms at all ages, because it's unclear which students would be at the emotional or developmental level required by the statute. So if classrooms just immediately need to go through everything they're teaching at all levels of public education, that would be a huge chilling effect on education in Florida.
You almost have to litigate it to even understand how it would be enforced.
Yeah, I think day one there'd be
and that's the thing. Like that's the issue. Taking all moral consideration out of it, as a legal document and analyzing it, strategically, without more proper definition of a lot of these things, like it's got to be litigated to even know what the standards are.
I read a couple of different media outlets' take on this, and the New York Times really did. I don't often come here and say the New York Times did a really good job at anything, but the New York Times did a really good job just kind of going line by line and kind of pointing out what we're talking about. Like, hey, maybe you support it, maybe you don't, but you need to know what's in it. I think a lot of people get, I think critical race theory is another thing like that, right? What does that, you see the guy on the street and he'll ask random people, what is critical race theory? What does that mean? We get this like don't say gay bill. We get these terms assigned to kind of complex concepts, complex statutes, and then we talk about them in general, and that always hurts us.
It's a big problem, man, with society in general, because I can't give you like exact percentages, but I would bet a large percentage of the people who are the most adamantly opposed to critical race theory, they don't say gay, but if you put a microphone in front of them and you're like, explain what this is, they're not going to be able to do it like accurately whatsoever.
Yeah.
So I think it's important if people take nothing from this to look into it yourself, and don't just. We've emphasized so heavily over our many shows, don't take the media's word for anything. Don't let a biased media inform your perspective, but so much. Do your own research, figure things out.
And we say that we know everybody doesn't have hours to dedicate to reading statutes, but yeah.
That's fine if you don't have hours to dedicate. Don't get so passionately upset about it, right? Like, just just go about your life.
If you're going to take the time to protest anything,
yes. If you're making a sign, you should have to take a test on the issue first before you can go.
Let's make that bill.
Yeah, it won't be vague. It'll be very specific.
If you can't explain your position, then your sign gets taken away. You're told to go home.
You have no sign. It's not like that, man.
A short test before the protest.
That's right. Just to make sure we're all on the same page.
Yes. I like it.
All right. Well, the Outlaw Lawyers, Josh Whitaker and Joe Hamer. You can find them at Whitaker and Hamer Law Firm. Our special guest from Whitaker and Hamer is Cassandra Nicholas today. We've got a lot of subjects to get to, including permanent daylight savings time. That's a big story across the country. We'll get to that next. Want to remind you, too, that if you've got a legal question, something you're going through and you need answers, here's a phone number for you, 800-659-1186. That's 800-659-1186. Leave your contact information, briefly what the call's about, and an attorney with Whitaker and Hamer will be in touch. You can always email your questions to the program, questions@theoutlawlawyer.com, and we have a great website, theoutlawlawyer.com. Go visit. We're back right after this.